Let's be joined now by a genuine healthcare expert, Dr. Jane Orient, Executive Director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Jane, as always, it is so good to have you here on America's Forum. Thanks for Skyping in from back in Arizona. Great to have you here.
Thanks, JD. We missed you here.
Well, bless your heart. It's great to have you on with the miracle of modern communications. Jane, let me ask you. You recently wrote an article, if I could paraphrase, saying, hey, don't get your hopes up that we'll see the repeal of Obamacare. Why not?
It's grown like kudzu, which I guess was called the vine that ate the South. It's just like any entitlement. It was designed to creep into everything, to spread its roots everywhere, and to get people who are making money from it deeply entrenched in the system. Insurance companies, navigators, big hospitals, they don't want to lose their benefits. The media is focusing on these few people who claim to have health care for the first time in their lives, which I doubt is the truth. I think that they've got insurance or their name on an insurance card confused with actually getting any medical care. But the media focuses on them. But the huge barrier to getting it repealed is all these other folks who are growing on it like mistletoe.
So we have the institutional kudzu, and though I represented Arizona in the Congress, I'm a native North Carolinian, so I know whereof you speak about kudzu in the South just continuing to grow, the institutional bureaucratic costs. But Jane, also in your article, you talked about a kind of personal and political cost for members of Congress and others in government. Once a benefit is put into place, members of Congress are loath to repeal it. Do you really think that's the attitude on the part of the incoming Republican majority?
I think that a lot of them are dedicated to the idea of repealing it, but I think the ones who are in charge have already surrendered preemptively, and at least Speaker Boehner apparently has a lot of vested interest in the stocks that he holds and the healthcare industry, which is doing just fine at the moment.
Well, we have 2 minutes remaining in this segment, Jane, and though you've graciously said you'll stay with us through the next segment, when you speak critically of Speaker Boehner, it brings to mind the question, since the House is convening in about 50 minutes, the first vote will be on Speaker. Do you think John Boehner should remain in that post?
I think that he has already signaled that he is opposed to the will of the voters that spoke in the 2014 election, but I think he may well remain simply because he is willing to punish people who disagree with him by just depriving them of any position in which they might be able to accomplish something.
And this notion of once someone receives a benefit or once it's in place, it's tough to reverse it. It sounds not only like Obamacare, Jane Orient, but also the whole prospect of amnesty. A little bit afield from medical care, but not really, because illegals are allowed to get Obamacare. Is this analogous somewhat to the amnesty being funded by moving forward even in the short term through March with Homeland Security and through September with funding Obamacare?
Oh, absolutely. Once you give someone something from the government, it's really hard to take it away. There will be all kinds of sad stories, but that's because the invisible, forgotten person from whom you took the benefit in the first place really has no effective voice.
Well, Jane Orient, you give a voice to the free market orientation for medicine, and we're going to ask you to stay with us through the break. When we come back, we'll take a look at some of the newcomers to Congress, some of their stated intentions, and could this injection of new blood, if I'm exhausting a medical metaphor, could it be, here's another, just what the doctor ordered? We'll talk more with Dr. Jane Orient about the future of Obamacare and the immediate future of the 114th Congress as we continue here on America's Forum. There's lots more to come as we're counting down not only to the start of midpoint, but to the start of the new 114th Congress. So stay with us here on Newsmax TV. Continue our conversation with Dr. Jane Orient, Executive Director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, Skyping in from the state I was so honored to represent for 6 terms in Congress, Arizona. Dr. Orient, there's another factor involved here. Even if the GOP passes the repeal of Obamacare in the House and the Senate, the president can veto that repeal. So both the author of Obamacare constitutionally can be its preserver, can he not?
That appears to be the case. And there is a real problem coming up in March when the Supreme Court hears the case of King versus Burwell to decide whether or not the president can just rewrite something that's clear in the law about whether subsidies can flow through federally established exchanges or must only go through state established exchanges. If that happens, millions of people will find out that they can't get this huge subsidy from the taxpayers to buy this overly expensive insurance that Obamacare is trying to force them to buy. Of course, for many of them, it will become unaffordable, so they won't be taxed for not having the insurance, but they still won't be able to have the insurance because Obamacare has made it so outrageously expensive.
You mentioned the role the Supreme Court may play in the upcoming case. And obviously, judicial review is vitally important and could really change this. But between now and then, are there some steps you expect Congress to take to try to at least roll back some of the provisions of Obamacare? And if so, what do you think is that comparative bipartisan low-hanging fruit?
Will Congress actually do anything? And bipartisan these days means surrender to the Democrats who are in control. I think that what they ought to do is repeal the individual mandate and repeal the employer mandate and redefine full-time employment as being 40 hours a week instead of 30 hours a week so that people can get a big chunk of their paycheck back that they have now lost because of Obamacare. I think that would be a good place for Congress to start.
And Jane, usually I accept your definition of what passes for bipartisanship on Capitol Hill. There is one important exception. It's when people at home start to feel the heat. And of course, nationally, when people are asked about Obamacare, most people strongly disapprove of it. So I'm wondering about things, for example, like the medical device sales tax being repealed, smaller things like that. Do you think we will see those reforms?
Maybe we will, and then the Congress can pat itself on the back and say, see, we did something to you. All you people who need things like hip prostheses or a pacemaker won't have to pay this tax, so you'll be better off. But I don't think that is really significant. The fact is that millions of people are being hurt by Obamacare. You may talk about a few who have health care, meaning they have an insurance card they didn't have before. But we're not hearing about the millions who have had insurance that they liked perfectly well being canceled, obliterated, destroyed.
And mindful of that, Dr. Orient, it appears that a physician is poised to run for president. Dr. Ben Carson was with us just a few mornings ago. He said, his own words, that people who tell you can't repeal Obamacare, quote, that's a bunch of crap. Now, that may be an inartful term medically, but does Dr. Carson have it right? Would you welcome his candidacy for the presidency?
I love Ben Carson. I think he's excellent, and I think he is right. Obamacare could be repealed, it could be defunded, but the question is whether the craven members of Congress, many of whom have deep, profound conflicts of interest, will actually do what needs to be done.
One reason I held no stock, I had any investments when I served on the Ways and Means Committee, because when you're working with the tax code, it can always be said, hey, you got a vested interest in doing something that affects your investments. Dr. Jane Orient, you offer a cautionary note that we appreciate very much, and your diagnosis of the political problems, though somewhat gloomy, is very candid. We appreciate it, and inherent therein is your challenge to the Congress about to be sworn in to take meaningful action. Dr. Orient, as always, we appreciate your clear, concise opinions on these subjects. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Jane Orient, Skyping in from Arizona, and America's Forum continues.